Good afternoon and welcome to our PBIS chat for teachers. Our topic today is on planning, structure, organization, and routines. My name is Jenny Kelly and I'm joined today by Dr. Stephanie Martinez and Dr. Ashley McSuga-Gage. We are with the Florida PBIS project and are very happy you could join us today. Taking a look at this graphic are the 5 broad areas of PBIS for families, classrooms, schools. What we will be doing today is focusing more deeply on structure. You see the link below, and there is a link to an overview of all 5 of these areas that were recorded previously, and now each one of these sections will become a deeper dive, one for families and one for teachers. So we're here today for teachers. I'm glad you could be here. These are unprecedented times that are putting huge demands on teachers, with so many experiencing a high level of personal and professional stress while we're trying to change our approach to teaching. Many teachers are anxious about getting it right for their students. Developing a plan that works for you will give you some feeling of control, which is important when all of us are feeling like there's no control over this situation. Even if you don't follow it to the letter, just having a plan will make you feel better. There are many things to consider when you're developing your plan. And if you have children at home, it makes it even that much more important. We'll talk in a few minutes about working your schedule in with your children's schedules, but let's look at some of the more important questions to address for your teaching responsibilities. The number 1 question is probably the most important, and by now, most should have that clearly understood. But it's a good idea to stay in contact with your administrators and fellow teachers in case there are new expectations as things change. Going down to question number 3, what platform or hub will I use for remote online learning? Many of us weren't all that experienced at using technology as the main source of teaching, so finding a platform that works for you and your students is so important. In the link that you will all be receiving for this webinar, you'll find a great chart with the most common platforms: Google, Teams, Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, with their key functions and other real pertinent information to help you compare those and determine if one might work better for you. Question number 7, who are my most instructionally vulnerable students and how will I support them, is a key consideration. We know that schools will be working very hard to catch students up when they return, and many will have great learning occurring at home. But we know that isn't the case for all of our students. Our most academically vulnerable students will be the ones that may have a harder time catching up when we all get back. So focusing on them now is really important. How you do that is up to you, but something that should be part of your master plan. And lastly, looking at number 10, it might be the most important consideration, especially when it comes to all the new technology and the demands on the system that might be an issue for you and your students. We know that this has occurred in numerous places, that the system videos aren't working or there are too many trying to sign in at the same time. So knowing who to contact for the type of help needed should also be at the top of your plan. The other questions here are other considerations. Knowing that your plan is what works for you may not look like another teacher's plan, but importantly to consider all of these elements as we go forward. I'll now turn over to Stephanie Martinez, who's going to talk to us about the physical space for teaching at home.
Thank you, Jenny. This is Stephanie Martinez. One of the first things we probably need to think about is setting up your home learning space, and how do we set that up if we also have our own children who are learning from home. So let's talk about some of those different features. So the first one is the most important to me, location, location, location. They say that's the most important with real estate, most important here too. In the top right-hand corner, you will see an image of a computer and then another desk. This is our 3rd attempt of trying to set up a location where I'm working from home. while my child is working from home. So that's one of the big things too. If you are doing different types of learning, so if you're doing a virtual meeting with students, some other things to consider would be noise or background level. What does the background also look like when you are doing some of those meetings? Materials. What are some different things that you will need to have with you that you can easily use as you're working? It's probably not visible here, but one of the big things that we had to consider was a power strip with all the different plugins for computers and cell phones, and also a printer. So thinking about those things. The other recommendation, as much as possible, is separate your learning environment or your working environment from other home activities. So you notice this is week 3, third attempt. This is the third different location in our house, and we have finally come to the realization that we have a space that we use just for learning and working, and then at the end of the day we can close the door and walk away, which is really important, so that way at the end of the day we are walking away from it. The other thing that was a consideration for me is that I want to have the ability to assist my child as much as possible as he needs for online learning while I'm working as well. And so we have a shared space, but we also have an unshared space when it's things like this. So we have that flexibility of that as well. And so those were some of the big considerations when putting those things in place. So even though we do have a shared space, there will be times where I need that privacy. So I love the example in the top corner. It's a mother who puts a sign on her door that says during this specific time, she is working and should not be bothered. Based on her kids, she knows the questions they most likely will ask. So she's already kind of pre-listed some answers for possible questions that she would get. My favorite one is piece of fruit. So that's probably, I'm hungry, I want something to eat. They also probably want to know where the location of their Game Boy is, their Kindle, their shoes, their basketball. And so she's given them a couple choices to look at upstairs or in your bedroom. So another thing to consider is during that time when you need that privacy and you can't be interrupted, what are some different activities that your child can work on during that time? And so here's a couple choices that I've given my son that he can do, what that is. These are some tips too you can provide to families who might be struggling with how to do that. The other thing is that we had to define as when I could be interrupted, and you might have to do that too with your own children, and identify what an emergency is. So the other day, I was doing a recording similar to this, and I told my son, I will have the door closed. I can't be interrupted for about 45 minutes. I will let you know when I'm done. You can come get me if it's an emergency. And I said, what's an emergency? He goes, a snack? I said, no, a snack is not an emergency. Let's really define what an emergency is. So as much as you might be playing the role of teacher and parent, here are some considerations maybe to make your life a little bit easier. Again, these are suggestions you can pass off to parents who are also maybe struggling with how to work at home and also provide learning for their child at the same time. So I said this earlier, and we're going to stress this again. As much as possible, if you can have one space for work and learning and one space for play or family space. So they are separated. By doing that, you are walking away from your work at the end of the day. It's so easy to get sucked into being available 24/7, but maybe your contract states you only have to be available for 4.5 hours a day. So trying as much as possible to do that. If it's not possible, then doing things like unplugging the laptops and putting them in a designated space so it's out of your play space. Also thinking about your kids, if there are certain items that they really like access to, like my son loves his Kindle, then during work time, the Kindle goes away. When he's done with that, then we take it out and we have it in family space. So just some things to make sure you have that distance between work and play.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. My name is Ashley Maxuga Gage, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about structure and organization. And again, as we move through all of these slides and all of these pieces, we're talking about how it's applicable to you as a teacher in your own home setting environment. But we also have a parallel chat, as Jenny referenced before, that talks about how families can do these pieces. And so if you're thinking about how do you translate what you heard here today into a format that'll be helpful for the families you're working with, we have that piece put together too. So when we think about structure and organization, we think about kind of two components. We think about our own daily schedule, as well as the schedule and organization of the things that we need to move through those days. So we have a couple of different sample schedules here. I think that at the beginning of the pandemic and when folks started to stay at home and not go into school, there was a mad dash and a mad scramble to provide structure for children. And that was really important, right? Because it helped children to feel a sense of predictability and a sense of safety, and to have that all set up. But we didn't necessarily pay as much attention to what the teacher's schedule would look like and what the teacher's day would look like. And so we have a couple of things that we wanted to draw your attention to. The first thing, and I think the most important thing, is to put on your oxygen mask before you help someone else. You know, they often talk about that on airplanes, and it's really true. How are you going to maintain your own health and wellness during this time period that can be very difficult? So if you have your own family to take care of, your own animals to take care of, your own household, and then you're also trying to teach and fit into other people's households, when is the time going to be for you to get out and get some fresh air, or to have a chance to take an online yoga class, or to do something that helps you to feel taken care of mentally and physically? So on the left-hand side, you'll see an example of a regular schedule that has some pieces related to both physical activity, but then social or brain break activity. You'll see in here around 5 o'clock, it has dinner and a screen break. Well, the screen break is probably not for you. The screen break is probably for the folks that you're entertaining, but it's your chance to call a friend, a family, a loved one, and just have a conversation with someone who's not in your immediate presence in your specific household. 7 o'clock, self-care time. You know, again, self-care kind of gets a bad rap lately because it's viewed as having to do something really creative and over the top. And I always see foaming bath bombs and fuzzy slippers. But for me, self-care at this point, honestly, with a 6-year-old and a 20-month-old, involves being in a different part of the house where they are not, and eating a piece of chocolate by myself for 5 minutes. And that might be my self-care, and that's okay. But just doing one thing for yourself on your own is kind of a way that you could conceptualize or think about that. You also will probably have particular schedules that your district is dictating for you, or your school is dictating. Some districts we found, because we've been checking throughout the state to see what folks are saying, are more structured than others. And so some schedules might be task-based versus actual time-based, while others might have particular times during the day that you need to arrive for PLC meetings, for professional development, for planning with your team, whatever that might be. So you want to make sure that you're checking in with the folks that are running your schools and your districts, but also we have some employer resources down there that you can go to take a look at. Okay, couple of things to make sure that you include in your schedule for yourself, not just the schedule that you're creating for everyone else who needs you, but having an on and off button on that schedule. So when are you going to start and when are you going to end? And one of the things that I've always shared with the pre-service teachers that I teach at the University of Florida is teaching is one of the most difficult jobs for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I think makes it the most difficult is because you can never do enough, and there's never really a time where you feel comfortable saying, I've given it my all and it's okay to stop. You could give it your all 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and there still wouldn't be a stopping point. So especially right now with everything that's going on and all of the multiple hats that folks are wearing and the additional stressors, I want you to really make sure that you're giving yourself time to shut off. And that may mean that you take email off of your phone for now, so that you don't accidentally read it in bed after you've said you're not going to work anymore. Or it might mean that you put a particular timer on the amount of time you're going to spend planning or prepping for the next day. And certain things might not get done, and that's okay. But you want to give yourself permission to walk away when you need to, and built in time to be able to wind down as well. Whether you need to wind down after you've taught online for several hours before you go back into your family setting and start making dinner, or if you need an hour or two to unwind before you can fall asleep at night. Making sure that you have those beginning and ending times is truly crucial. Thinking about your schedule matching requirements versus necessarily particular hours of the day. So in an ideal world, it might be fantastic for you to be able to meet face-to-face with your students in morning meeting, and then while they're doing independent work, plan for the next day or plan for later in the day. But the reality of that situation is that you also have your own 7th grader and 4th grader at home who need help with their independent work tasks during your quote-unquote planning time. So being flexible where possible about that, and realizing that, again, it's a task, not a time that dictates your schedule. And so perhaps in the evening, if your kids have time where they watch a movie together, or where they're playing a board game with another family member, or maybe they're FaceTiming with a friend, that becomes your planning time. Even if that time is after dinner and you typically wouldn't plan from 7 to 8 o'clock at night, whatever helps to facilitate your day, matching your schedule to the requirements, not necessarily particular times. And then finally, this is an important one I've learned for my kindergartner, but also for myself: don't get hangry. Hangry people have a hard time teaching, learning, and being empathetic. So make sure that you're building in time for lunch, snacks, breaks. And if your homeschool workspace is separate from the rest of your house, go ahead and make a lunchbox or have a container that has things that you can quickly grab and eat when you're in between calls or meetings or whatever it is that you're doing. We often emphasize that children need choice in order to be successful, or that choice can be a successful way of improving kiddo behavior, letting them decide what they need to do and when they need to do it to help them move through their day. This is an example of one of the schedules that Stephanie actually made for herself in terms of thinking about which activities were critical. So what does she have to do right now? What's next on the list? And what would be great? Washing clothes is probably something that you really can't move on without doing, especially if you're having workout or exercise time. And I'm finding in our house right now that we're having multiple outfit changes daily. But something such as journaling or watching a webinar on self-care, although those things are nice, they're things that can wait a little bit longer than the smelly shorts that your kiddo is going to need the next day when they're doing their virtual gym class. And then at the end of the day, there may be some things that would fill your personal cup, but again, are not critical. I know that some people have differing views on Tiger King. It has personally gotten me through the pandemic on the memes alone. And there were several times where I would get to the end of my day by saying that it would be nice if I could sit and watch this, and I would immediately fall asleep about 2 minutes in. So if that didn't get done, but instead I made sure the dog got fed, that was important because it was on my would be nice activity list rather than something that was critical that had to happen that day. Okay, thinking about routines. It's always nice to kind of have ways that we build in to remind ourselves of what we need to do to have our day run smoothly. And prior to the pandemic and working from home, I had some great routines around if I was going to get up before the kids woke up to go work out, I would lay out my workout clothes, make sure that my key to lock the door was already in my pocket, and I would have my shoes untied, because untying a knotted shoe takes longer in the morning when you're exhausted than it does when you're awake. But I didn't necessarily have routines related to my use of online platforms. But those are really important, especially right now. Many of the platforms, such as Zoom, are experiencing such heavy volume and use that there have been concerns about security. And so those platforms are updating every day or 2 days rather than once a month or every 4 months like they used to. So I have to update my computer more frequently, which is something that I might not have thought of. Also thinking about other things like what are the start and end times of my meetings? Since I have so many, do I have the links for those? One really great way that I found of keeping my links straight is I use my Outlook calendar, and within the notes section of the calendar, I immediately cut and paste the link for the particular meeting I have, even if it's a reoccurring link or a reoccurring meeting, into that calendar invite. So all I have to do when that time of day pops up on my computer screen, on my watch, on my phone, is to click into the actual calendar itself, and my link is right there. In terms of thinking about what you're wearing or the location of where you'll be Zooming, I have had to convert to my what I call my mobile office, which is my car at certain points in time. And I'll sit in my car if I have to do something like recording for working on a webinar or something that's a live chat where I don't have the option to mute myself for a few minutes. So I might relocate based on what I'm doing. But I'm considering some of those different pieces. Other routines that you might need to be thinking about are when you're going to be able to assess your students and what time you have for providing feedback. Thinking about when you're going to have meetings with your school district personnel, your co-teachers, thinking about content areas, but also professional development. And what really is the critical information that you need to be able to successfully use technology, as well as what are some extra pieces that maybe you're getting information on. So there might be a series of webinars that would be great to attend if you had unlimited time, but you need just the basic information to be able to run the classrooms or classes or experiences that you're currently teaching. The final thing is to think about what you can do to clearly articulate to students and families when and how they can communicate with you. And the reason why I think this one is the most critical routine to establish is because otherwise you're kind of open for business all the time. And so right now, families may be reaching out to you at all hours of the day, emailing with different questions, repeat questions, etc. So if you can even just establish for folks, every Sunday by noon, you'll get an email from me with information for the upcoming week. This information will include what your student will be doing in terms of any spirit activities or bonus activities. It will include information about our daily schedule related to when they need to meet synchronously versus when they'll have independent tasks. And then families come to expect that email. That will probably cut down on the amount of times that someone emails you and says, I'm not sure about what's happening next week, because they know it's coming at that particular time on that particular day of the week. Another thing that you might want to do is set up virtual office hours where families can drop in and chat with you or talk to you. My daughter's kindergarten teacher today held a lunch bunch where she ate lunch online with her students. Everyone was unmuted and folks got to drop in and ask questions. So just building in predictable times when folks can get your attention will help to reduce the number of nonstop email communications, calls, etc. that you're getting at random times of the day, because folks will know when they can get to you, and hopefully will reduce stress. Okay. In terms of thinking about how we support social and emotional learning for students when we're not there with them in the moment and in the physical classroom, there are a couple of different ways that we can do that. One of the things that's been great that we've been using in my college level courses are Google Forms. So you can do just quick check-ins with your older students or with their parents about how they're feeling. I've seen folks for younger students use morning meeting and gestures for kiddos to talk about what they're feeling. They've read a book about feelings or social emotional topics and then had the students draw a picture or write on their whiteboard. Any of these are good options that you can use. Zoom has a reaction button that they're starting to use now. So reactions, emojis, again, visuals can all be options that you could use. Okay. So again, thinking about the different options for social emotional learning, you might record some videos or use videos that have already been recorded to focus on particular topics that you are worried about either for your students or that you are working on in the virtual or physical classroom prior to moving to a virtual environment. Some folks have the option for a counselor corner where their school or their grade level has drop-in times again for counselors, and they can schedule appointments. And you might want to send out one idea in your weekly communication to families or in a follow-up communication to families during the week that they could try at home to help work with their own students around these issues. Some common areas of focus right now that we've been seeing are students and their families that are dealing with modulating anxiety about not knowing what's coming next. Also dealing with missing friends or feeling like they're missing out on milestone events. I don't know if anybody's seen on Facebook, but there's been a campaign lately of folks posting on social media their high school graduation pictures for all of those folks who aren't going to be able to physically graduate in person. So there's a sense of loss or grief, and those are all social and emotional learning opportunities for us to help our students with at home. Okay, some other considerations, just your own mental well-being, making sure that you're doing a check of where you are and seeing how you're feeling, and then thinking about what are the things that make you run. I was talking to a friend who was walking by the fence of my property the other day, and she said, I'm missing all of my inputs. And for her, her inputs include a lot of social time with other adults outside of the home. And so I said, well, what are you doing instead? And she said, well, I'm getting outside for these walks, but I'm going with my family. And I said, but you just told me that the thing you're missing is interaction with other adults, not necessarily your children. I said, so what are you doing with other friends, women in the neighborhood to help you out? And she said, well, I hadn't really thought of that. You know, we're not supposed to be together. And so I said, well, for example, there are a group of us who run every morning at 6:30, and we go out before our kids wake up, and we stay at least, actually not 6 feet, about 20 feet apart. We run, we chat, and we come home. And she was really excited to hear about that because it hadn't occurred to her that she could still have a social interaction without children in a safe way. And so she was going to try to join that group at least once a week. She couldn't do 5 days a week, but once a week was good for her. And so that would help to kind of recharge her battery. So thinking about what would help you with that. Thinking about your hobbies, you know, you might have participated before in a book club or something else that would get you together with other people. And even if you can't physically meet to have a glass of wine together, could you do that virtually? And maybe you're not discussing an entire book. Maybe you guys pick something smaller like a short story or a podcast, because right now everyone's time is limited. But finding ways to still engage in your hobbies and the things that make you connected in ways that don't take up too much of your time. Okay, so physical activity, we've kind of already touched on this, but making sure that you get out and about at least a little bit a few times a day. So building in breaks, rotating online versus offline tasks, and I think really a change of scenery is one of the biggest things that you can do to help with just kind of resetting your mental clock. So if you would normally take a call inside at your desk and you've been in the same room, even if it's a standing desk, for the last 4 hours, switch to the porch outside as long as no one's doing yard work. Or think about trading rooms. So you might want to just move to a different physical space even within the house. We talked about socially distant social contact a lot throughout this entire presentation, but organize a play date for yourself if you can. So think about ways that you can maintain social distance but still be connected with one another. Going back to Tiger King that Stephanie mentioned before, maybe you have a group of you that are watching it together and you have a text thread where you're writing about the ridiculous things that you're seeing. Okay, finally, finding things that you can do with those around you and without them necessarily that make you happy. We've included a few pictures here from some things that we've been doing. My family is in the bottom center there, outside planting and doing some gardening work.
Then my son is up in the right-hand corner. We have decided Wednesday evenings are what we call home ec night, and so he has to plan and cook a meal for that. The one in the middle is Zoom, and it says Warrior Life Fitness. That's the gym I started going to right before this all happened. And so she posts the workouts, and my neighbor and I, with social distancing, do driveway workouts a couple days a week. And the left-hand corner, Monroe County Public Schools, the social workers have gotten together and are doing a support group for teachers, which I thought was pretty cool. And then the bottom left-hand corner, I know Ashley mentioned possibly doing these Zoom chats for your wine nights. I've got one I do every week, but it's also a time where your kids can connect. And so my son's been missing his aunt and uncle and his cousins and his grandmother. And so we put Zoom on his Kindle, and he was able to do that as well, which was nice too, because it gave me a break for a few minutes. So just a couple things to wrap up. We've talked a lot about self-care. Here's just another idea and example. Pasco County Schools sent this out in their parent newsletter, and it's just a reminder about fun things that families can do at the end of the day. What's really nice about these, none of them really cost any money, and probably you have the majority of them at your house. We've added a few resources here for you. Some of the links we've already mentioned previously in the chat. This is for the live chat, so we're not going to do it here, but what I do want you to do is think about what's working for you and continue, and then figure out what's not working and see if you can come up with some ideas to fix those. Thank you for participating. You are doing a great job of being both a teacher and probably a parent educating your child at home during this time. This is our contact information. If you have additional questions, this recording will be posted on the PBIS website. We will also have handouts and the resources that Jenny mentioned to go along with it in both, some of them in both English and in Spanish.